Well, this is a packed room. I saw there were 282 RSPVs online for this session, and I knew the room only held 100 people, so it's good to see you all here. Before we get started, a couple housekeeping items. If you want to connect with us on LinkedIn, if you like what we have to say, you can scan the QR code below our picture, and we'd love to hear from you at the end of the session. Tell us what you thought with the survey QR code. Well, now let's get started. I'm Jason Levin. I'm the Executive Director of WG Labs. We're an early stage innovation arm for Western Governors University. I'm here to moderate the panel today addressing critical workforce sources through innovative delivery models. And I'll let my panelists introduce themselves. We'll start with Stacy.
Great. I'm Stacy Ludwig Johnson, and I'm the SVP and Executive Dean for the School of Ed. Been with WGU working on year 26. So started as employee 9, sort of working on this whole crazy competency-based education model. Right now, really excited about the work in terms of supporting educators, particularly as we're looking towards CBE and teacher apprenticeship work.
Good morning, or I guess good afternoon. So I'm Stephanie Locke. I'm here on behalf of Innovate EDU. I recently joined that team to oversee the EdTech markets portfolio, but I've met many of you through my previous work at America Succeeds, talking about durable skills and pathways and opportunities into the world of work.
Great. Hi, I'm Ryan Craig. I'm Managing Director at Achieve Partners. We're a investment firm at the intersection of education and employment. And I'm also co-founder of Apprenticeships for America.
Great. Well, let's get started. When we talk about workforce shortages, where specifically do we see these workforce shortages, and what are the underlying conditions that cause them to take place in the first place? Maybe we'll start with Ryan at the end.
Sure. Well, look, I mean, I think there are sectors that are famous for their talent gaps. You see them on the front page of the New York Times. It's the cybersecurity, semiconductor, manufacturing. But I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. The challenge that we're seeing is that there are jobs across the economy that are demanding a combination of digital skills, business and industry knowledge, role knowledge that even a decade ago didn't have that level of specificity in those jobs. And that includes, and particularly pertinent for this conversation, entry-level jobs, where there are jobs that 10 years ago you needed a degree and some interest in order to secure a position, but today you need to check those boxes, but a lot more boxes. And so we're seeing a skills gap, we're seeing an experience gap, where there are literally jobs that are demanding 12, 18, 24 months of experience for jobs that used to be entry-level jobs. So, and that's really everywhere where you have technology impinging on jobs that did not have such a tech focus before. And because every job now is using software platforms to perform, much of the work that even a decade ago didn't require software platforms, these talent shortages or the skills gap is everywhere today.
Thank you. Stephanie, how is Innovate EDU thinking about the skills gap?
So Innovate EDU's work broadly spans policy, practice, and technology development. And in particular for this conversation, I'd draw in the Pathways Alliance. So that is all focused on expanding access to teaching roles and building out diversity in our teacher pipelines. And so through that partnership, it's an uncommon coalition of organizations working to solve that problem in particular. That they've put out national guideline standards for teacher apprenticeships. They've talked a lot about different on-ramps into the profession. And just to add on to what Ryan was saying, I think we traditionally think about sort of trades-based roles or the big five like IT and healthcare, but we have talent gaps across every profession, education notably being a really big one of them.
Yeah, Stacy, I'm curious on your perspective. So there's definitely a well-known teacher shortage. and different states have tried all sorts of things, alternative routes to licensure, not requiring a master's degree, et cetera. I'm curious, how is WGU approaching this problem?
So I think one way that we're really looking at this is we're recognizing the teacher shortage, and it's really coming from several different issues. One is there's about an 8% turnover of teachers within their first year. About 50% leave in the first 5 years of their employment as a teacher. And that's a real challenge when you consider the impact that has on student outcomes in their classrooms. And when you look at the challenge, it's multi-pronged. One is certainly pay is a challenge. A second is certainly around what we consider educator well-being at WGU. And so we're building in a thread through our curriculum called Healthy Learning to sort of equip educators, equip teachers with the skills needed to really be resilient in the classroom. But I think one of the biggest challenges is actually the way in which we educate and train our future teachers. And so we've been doing that obviously through the competency-based education model, which allows students to accelerate. And if they are employed in a school district, we find that they actually graduate in the programs 2 to 3 years versus 4 or more, because they're applying the competencies they're learning in their coursework into the classroom the next day. But that's one of the biggest challenges, and Stephanie already addressed it, is really the challenge around how do we diversify the workforce. And when you take the scale of WGU, we graduate about 16,000 teachers a year. If we can create diversity within the students enrolled in our program, we can actually have an impact on teachers broadly. And that's where we've really been looking towards teacher apprenticeships as a way to sort of historically, apprenticeships certainly recruit more diverse workforce. Individuals in apprenticeship programs are more likely to retain and complete, and then they're more likely to stay in the classroom longer. So that's a real promise, and really sort of the conversation I was excited about today is how do you take competency-based education and mesh it with apprenticeships. It's perfect. It's like built for each other, so.
Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
I just want to make a point about apprenticeships and diversity. It's kind of ironic because when folks who are in the apprenticeship business think about apprentices, they don't think about diversity because, in fact, apprentices today in the U.S. are not diverse. Apprentices are mostly in the building trades, and it's 75-80% male, and not as diverse as the workforce, unfortunately. But when our firm builds apprenticeship programs in technology and healthcare and so forth, and we open up apprentice cohorts to applicants, we have hundreds of applicants for every seat, and our cohorts are majority underrepresented minority. So when you provide a paid pathway to an interesting or lucrative career, it's a great tool for diversifying the workforce, absolutely, and much more valuable than a traditional tuition-based or debt-based pathway.
Well,
Ryan, I know you've written a lot about innovative models in education, and I was curious what was the motivation for the most recent book, and why do you think an apprenticeship model offers promise that some of those others haven't realized?
Yeah, it's just simply if you compare the U.S. to almost every other developed country, we have gone all in. I sort of step back, big picture, we've gone all in on tuition-based infrastructure for career launch in this country. No other country has gone as all in, put everything on red, right? We've done that. Every other country has hedged their bets to a much greater extent and invested much more, relatively speaking, in earn and learn infrastructure for career launch, which is more equitable because we're not asking students to take a financial risk and we're not asking them to take an employment risk because apprenticeships are jobs, right? You're hired from day one. You're not expected to attend class or spend your time training before you're hired. You're hired and you're being paid from day one. So that's what an apprenticeship program is. And it's a shame that today that it's only 0.3% of the workforce in the U.S., which is 1/10 of what it is in, let alone Germany Austria, Switzerland, but just France, Canada, UK, countries that most people don't associate with apprenticeships. They're an order of magnitude better than we are on apprenticeship, and it's very common in those countries to launch careers in tech and healthcare, financial services, and education as an apprentice, which means that you're not taking financial risk, you're not taking employment risk, you're hired from day one, and it's a pathway.
I'm curious the panelist perspective on what are the barriers in the U.S. from making that kind of progress. Maybe Stephanie, we'll start with you.
All the easy questions coming my way? No. I would just frame it in the perspective of like this. There's so much more going on in the marketplace, and in particular, I think if we root this in a learner-centered perspective, we're sort of opening our eyes up to not a new conversation, but a really important one about learners' perception of return on investment for the pathways that we've laid out before them. And so I think we've seen, thanks to young people, thanks to the student debt conversation, thanks to the ongoing skills and talent gap conversations, sort of a need to think differently about how we're thinking about pathways into the world of work. And like, I haven't been doing this very long, but it's been a through line throughout my entire career, is like the multiple pathways, multiple on-ramps, far more flexibility. And we have put so much of that on the learner themselves. And I think this is an incredible moment in time to start thinking differently about how we take the burden off of the learners and we start to redesign systems that are flexible and accessible and serve a lot more of the people that exist in our communities, but also at the same time have a benefit to business and economic growth and the jobs we need to fill to keep moving ahead as a country.
Stacey, I know you've spent at least the last 6 months doing a deep dive into the possibility of a teacher apprenticeship degree. And I'm curious what your perspective on like what would an institution like WGU have to do to make that a reality?
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, it's really complicated, so that's a barrier. I have just learning how to navigate. Should you be a rep? If you are, is there a sponsor, a mini intermediary, RTI provider? Like, there's all these different flavors, and I think that's a barrier immediately off the bat in terms of how you bring all these individuals together and make it as easy as possible, because it is not. It's not easy yet. I think that there's a couple of different things that we've been talking about with the different districts and state consortiums. And one is, how do you actually sort of incentivize the districts, or in this case, in our case, they're the employers, to really support apprenticeships. And so that, number one, is a challenge in helping the dollars to flow. Like if you're looking at an apprenticeship with a capital A, from the federal dollars down through a sponsor and out to the districts. And there's lots of questions around that, but incentivizing that support. And then I think there is some risk, and this, in terms of employers that are utilizing apprenticeships, because they're paying for that individual to have nearly a full-time wage, and they may not be getting all of the equivalent of a professional full-time person out of that role. In the education space, it's really wonderful because they can use parapros, and that's part of their staffing plans. So that's a space where we're really looking at how do we help districts take the parapros that are in their classrooms, and then through apprenticeships, essentially, they're on a path to a free degree, and they're getting paid to do it. To borrow a comment from David Donaldson with the National Grow Your Own Work, but I think that's the real promise. But I think the other, let me say one more, is really around, there's a lot of definitions and a lot of different ways to do it, and everyone has sort of a different perspective on how you define apprenticeship and what the requirements are. So those are the main challenges.
I love that.
There's a lot of it out there, but
I love that answer because you started and ended with the employer, which is absolutely right. And if you had someone from the Department of Labor here, is there anyone from the Department of Labor here and asked that question, they wouldn't say that. They would say something about training or worker protection or something like that, but they wouldn't go to the employer. But at the end of the day, it's common sense, right? An apprenticeship is a job. In order to create an apprentice job, you need a willing employer who's willing to hire and pay a worker who's probably not going to be as productive as one might like from the get-go. So whether it's with a parapro or a substitute teacher, those are the pathways. But you need to be in the business of trying to solve a business problem for that employer client, and it's hard, right? Not too many universities. In fact, there's any university in the country that can solve this, it's WGU, because WGU was founded 20 plus years ago as an employer-centric, competency-based institution. So I'm excited about to see how this evolves.
Yeah, I think that it's been really interesting too, Ryan, because it's a challenging process, and some of the employers that need the most are rural, and they're often understaffed, and because the process can be challenging, we actually could do more probably to help them do what they need to do so they can be part of sort of the ecosystem. And so those are some of the things that I'm learning as we're walking this path, is that the people who need the support the most may not be in a position where they can navigate it honestly. So we've got to figure that out. We have to make it easier. So.
Ryan, I know you talk about in your book how other countries solve this problem, and maybe you could share that with the audience, but also how you think we might solve that in the U.S.
Well, there is some progress to report over the last. My book came out 6 months ago, and there is some progress to report. But the gist of it, so you don't have to buy it or read it, is that one, we don't spend nearly enough money. Other countries are outspending us by 1 or 2 orders of magnitude on earn and learn pathways, and we're spending the money the wrong way. So the Department of Labor, they provide grants, and they provide grants to organizations that are good at applying for Department of Labor grants, not good at creating apprentice jobs, and those tend to be workforce boards and community colleges who actually don't employ apprentices. They'll take the grant money, develop curriculum, sit on their hands and wait for an employer to come along and say, hey, we really want to use that curriculum for our apprenticeship program. But that's not how you know this. That's not how. There's probably no employer out there who's saying, I'd start an apprenticeship program if only I could find a community college that's developed the curriculum. So that's the problem. We need to move from grant-based funding to formula-based funding, which other countries have. So higher ed, we have the world's best tuition-based career launch infrastructure because funding flows with the student. Funding for apprenticeship and all work-based learning should flow with the worker or apprentice. It's common sense, and every other country has figured it out. We haven't, which is why I mentioned earlier, the Department of Labor, they wouldn't have gone to the employer. They would have gone to some training question, because that's the fundamental category error, is that we viewed apprenticeships and I'd say work-based learning generally as in the category of workforce development training programs, and they're not, because they're jobs. And other countries don't fund them out of the same sort of workforce development training budgets and buckets. They fund them differently. And we're on our way. So the progress to report is that in the minibus that passed a month ago to fund the government, Congress has directed now the Department of Labor to look at shifting in the 25-year from grant-based funding to formula-based funding for apprenticeships. And I'm hopeful that we move in that direction. We begin to see actual apprentice job creation across the economy, teachers, tech, and so forth. And then that will spur a significant increase in the investment, which is bipartisan, by the way.
Stephanie, you look like you had something to say. Well, I was just about to ask you, how is Innovate EDU thinking about overcoming these barriers? Like, about what are your programs doing?
So again, Innovate EDU is really specifically focused on teacher apprenticeship pathways, but something we actually talked about on the prep call that I think is really important to call out here is that for apprenticeships to work, we have to incentivize the work-based learning for underfunded employment pathways. So I saw a few friends, so I'll call them out, from CompTIA here. Like many tech companies and tech providers can afford to invest in training their workforce in a way that a rural school district can't. And so if we want to really expand pathways at scale across our economy, there has to be much stronger mechanisms to fund education, to fund public services, to fund business functions that would otherwise, to Ryan's point, require 18, 24, 36 months of experience at the entry level and start thinking about those as work-based learning, learn and earn sort of pathways in really meaningful ways that, frankly, like most small companies, rural companies, most of our economy just can't afford to do today without help.
Yeah, unfortunately, as is often the case, is money is the problem, and it's hard to solve that problem without public support. So when we were investigating apprenticeships for the Teachers College, we learned about the registered apprenticeship program. Stacy, why don't you share what you've learned about that and get the other panelists' perspective?
So what I have learned is that there are the big A, capital A apprenticeships, which are the registered apprenticeships through, and I'm going to look at, because he'll correct me if I'm wrong here. And I have been navigating all of this and doing a lot of deep dives, but being a capital A apprenticeship isn't the only pathway. So there are also, I'll call them little A apprenticeships, and these are all in his book too. But what I think we're finding, so WGU, we work across all 50 states, and with our School of Education, we license teachers in all 50 states. So we are looking at looking at scalable models, and the ability to braid together the funding is still something that I still have to learn a lot about, because there's ways in which you can do that makes sense. But many states are not, they're sort of bypassing that challenge of going through the process of registering and actually doing their own apprenticeship programs at the state level, even at the local level. I mean, in Texas, we connect with ISDs that are actually doing their own, whether they're registering as a RAP, as a sponsor, or what they're doing exactly. But I think some people are actually bypassing that need to register and receive the Department of Labor dollars, because what comes with that is really challenging reporting. And that reporting challenge also can be a barrier, and so they're sort of working around those pieces. So that's one thing that I've definitely been learning, is trying to understand what that looks like. And then one thing that I've also found that's really unique about WGU is how you could take a competency-based model, because one of the values of many is the ability for students to accelerate. And so if you're thinking about an apprenticeship program where you've got somebody, in my case, that's been a parapro in the classroom, they are bringing competencies to the table. And so we don't force them to sort of lockstep through the seat time conundrum. And that's where I'm trying to figure out actually how best to mesh all of the goodness of competency-based that allows you to move where you can. You can go fast, you can go slow when you need to, but not get sort of locked into the 2,000 hours of time in that particular occupation. So if you have some ideas around that, because I don't want to get locked into that. I want our students to be able to move through.
Yeah, I mean, so I think you hit the nail on the head. The challenge with the registered apprenticeship program is there's not too many incentives to do it, because there's no formula funding that comes from it. So you can, just to give you a sense of what it would involve, you could register, and then you could apply to your state to get on their what's called ETPL list, eligible training provider list, and then you could go to the local workforce boards and apply for some of their WIOA workforce federal dollars there. But those dollars are allocated year to year, so you'd be trying to sort of get in there somehow. And then, of course, if you're a national organization running with remote workers, it doesn't make sense to try to, what you're going to do 50 states, it doesn't make sense to do it, and the dollars are small anyway. Couple that with the huge burden of applying. I was speaking with the CHRO of a big hotel organization a few years ago, who told me he applied for a registered apprenticeship program, and that's something he will never do again. Because it's literally hundreds of, well, not just the forms, but the documentation. You have to create policies that you didn't even think of needing to create. And the bad news is the Department of Labor now has proposed 800 new pages of rules on registered apprenticeship programs, which I've written about, and hopefully we won't see most of those will disappear as part of the rulemaking process. So we have the it needs to be flipped, right? We need and Apprenticeships for America, this organization that I'm part of, their mission is we need to increase the incentives and reduce the barriers, and not the opposite. So common sense and getting a lot of traction.
I think we'll have a few minutes to go to audience questions. But before we do, I'm curious from each of the panelists, like, what is the takeaway? What can we do absent some government intervention? Maybe we'll start with Ryan.
I'm happy to start. Yeah. I mean, I would say, and our company, so we have 10 companies in our portfolio, mostly in tech and healthcare, that have apprenticeship programs, and only one of them is a registered program receiving any. And even that program, the dollars that they're getting from the government are negligible. So these are all unsubsidized, 90% small A apprenticeship programs. And what are they doing? Well, they're solving a business problem for their clients. So that is easier for our companies, which started life as staffing companies, solutions, consulting companies. It's harder probably for a university, but easier for WGU than for any other university. You need to approach districts and states as clients and solve a talent business problem for them. And the good news is that if the missing piece of the puzzle is funding or subsidy, there are lots of states and even municipalities and foundations that are interested in funding these kinds of models that you're talking about that can help fill that gap.
I would add on to that and just call out the need to think about this as a holistic ecosystem. And so I know at this conference and many others that you go to, everyone will sit and say, we need public sector partners and we need employer partners and we need education system partners. But I think too often these conversations are happening in rooms and silos and not talking about the meaningful partnership. And to Ryan's point, that solving a true business problem of what do you need, how can we do this right now as a little A apprentice? Or I'm really encouraged by the expansion of career-connected learning and work-based learning as we think about that moving into K-12. And so it's not just post-secondary and it's not just the registered apprenticeships, but really pulling work-based learning into K-12 systems through employer partners and setting up pathways that look really different than the pathways that we have today.
And Stacey, what do you think we can do absent government intervention? Or what are you doing actually? Because you're actually doing something about it.
Yeah. So, we have two wicked problems. One has always been that barriers to entry for teachers into the profession have been the requirement to quit your job and sort of volunteer to student teach for 3 months in the classroom. And when so many of our school districts are part of that, they're developing the Grow Your Own. They want to build people from within their community that really mirrors the students that they're teaching. That requirement to really to stop out and lose your compensation and your health benefits for 3 months to volunteer, like that is absolutely a barrier to the teachers that we actually need in their classroom. And so I think that's the promise of the teacher apprenticeships. We've been trying to do that, solving that through scholarships, philanthropic funding. But I think if we can work with the districts and help them establish the apprenticeship program as part of their actual staffing so that they're utilizing their parapros and those individuals are now being paid while they're getting that free education. And we can work on figuring out how we braid the funding. So even if we don't have Department of Labor dollars, there's other funding sources out there that we can braid together so that their degree on their path to teach is free, because they don't make enough money right now to actually pay back any loans. So we have to do that piece. And then, this is now going to create that challenge where if we actually are really good at this, our parapros are going to turn to teachers, which means now we're going to have to backfill a critical parapro need, which is high school students, in my opinion, that are excited and inspired to be teachers. So that's sort of the wicked problem. And back to the diversity, even though you said apprenticeships are not really diverse in the teacher world, we find that they are.
Oh,
because
no,
they're
yeah, I mean
using
in the
them to mirror-
trades, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but like those are the two wicked problems. And I've been hitting my head against the wall for about 5 years now on both of those. And this is maybe not the only answer, but it's the only answer I can see right now. So if there's other answers that fit those two bills, please let me know, because that is, in my opinion, what we can do at our scale to make it.
Yeah, I think there's another answer with substitute teachers. So just very briefly, there's a huge substitute teacher shortage. One reason is that sub jobs are bad jobs; they're gig jobs, right? We've been looking for some period of time. Maybe someone here can help me. Looking to buy a substitute teacher staffing company, a good one, if that exists, and transform it into, we're not hiring you, we're not sending you a text at 4 a.m. saying, do you want this job today in this classroom? We're going to hire you full-time. You're going to be a full-time employee of our company. We're going to staff you to a district as a sub, and while you're doing that, you're going to get your alt cert, and then 18 months later, you will be then a full-time teacher in that district. So we're going to solve the substitute teacher problem, and that's an apprenticeship pathway to solving this. So, but you know, it's the same idea, parapro, substitute teacher, but again, you're solving the district's problem, which is that they don't have a reliable source of subs. And of course, if you provide that pathway, you're going to get much higher caliber candidates and subs than you would otherwise.
Okay, so I have a deal for you. I have 46,000 teachers in our programs. We need to figure out how we go to the districts that need these teachers that are in prep programs, and we could solve it 3 different ways.
Well, you could be an intermediary, and you could be the employer of record and start a substitute teacher
Actually,
staffing
yeah.
company. So let's work
interesting.
together on it.
We're going to solve the problems of the world. So.
Great. That was wonderful. Thanks for the free consulting, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you.
We have a few minutes left. Let's go to the, see if there's any questions from the audience.
There you go.
Hi, my question is for Stacy. You had shared about competency-based education and pairing that with apprenticeships. Can you share some examples of what that would look like?
Yeah, so we've actually been working with our friends at Reach University. The chancellor there, Mallory's been just a really great sort of help as we're navigating this. And so what we plan to do is to scale a competency-based model, we use a master curriculum, okay? So every individual, regardless of where they begin, they're gonna all sort of traverse a master curriculum. But the value that we have is we're looking at apprenticeships is actually the way in which they can demonstrate those competencies. So it's the answer, right? So if you're on the job, you're actually demonstrating these competencies for the coordinating teacher, they can actually verify that you've demonstrated that. So if they're coming through our master curriculum and they're in an apprentice program, then they'll be able to demonstrate their competencies in the context of the classroom. If they're coming through our programs and they're on a standard sort of student teaching path, then we've had them demonstrate competence through objective exams, but primarily performance assessments. So I'm actually really excited because I think it's a higher quality demonstration of competence to actually be doing it in the classroom along the way. So that's how we intend to do it. But where the flexibility comes is really working with WGU so that we're comfortable with sort of multiple ways in which we're measuring those competencies. I don't know if that answered your question, but that everyone is still taking all of the content, but you can demonstrate competence so much more quickly because you're actually applying it. So. Yeah.
There's something really unique, though, about the Reach University program that we didn't touch on in the panel, is that if you go through Reach University in the educator program, you come out with a degree. And so we still live in a world and a paradigm where that bachelor's degree really, really matters, not just for that first job, but for your resiliency over time as jobs continue to change. And so there's actually this opportunity to innovate as apprenticeships as a way to a degree pathway that is still credentialed and recognized with labor market currency, that apprenticeships, when you switch industries, don't necessarily hold in the same way. And so I'd hope or that beyond reach, we start to see that sort of apprenticeship to degreed credential switching or expanding into other areas of apprenticeship.
And that degree programs of all forms integrate real work experience into their programs so that maybe an apprenticeship degree doesn't look that different from a typical degree someday.
Exactly. I mean, that's why it's so perfect with the competency-based model. So students, all of them that come through our programs end up with a degree and a recommendation to license across all 50 states as they move through the program. But I think that's the sweet spot with competency-based and apprenticeship, because then you get the acceleration as well, which is high value.
I think we have a question here in the third row.
I have a million questions, but I'm just going to ask two, and you can pick whichever ones you want. One thing that I've been thinking about, I work for TNTP. We're doing a lot of the similar, like trying to figure out how we expand access to teaching, credentialing. Have you thought at all about working with chambers of commerce in order to get funding? So instead of looking at the district necessarily as the funders, thinking about how this improves access to employees, people who have the revenue to be able to spend in local businesses. It's a thing that I've been kicking around a little bit, and so I'd love to hear, to the extent you've tried it, thought about it, how that's going. And then the second question is, in the apprenticeship model, is it restricted to participation directly through the school district, or is there a way that you can expand that to people who are doing related work with community-based organizations that provide after-school instruction, intervention, extended day types of things? I'm just wondering if it's strictly has to be through the school itself.
Actually, again, I am in learning mode, but we connected with Accelerate, which is a high-dosage tutoring model, and they're very, very interested in just finding different partners that could do apprenticeships. So I would say that's probably an example, and that was new to me. I mean, I've been so focused on sort of that traditional classroom teacher. So in different models, and that's where it gets a little bit challenging, but different models, like they'll say, as long as you're spending 5 hours a week, so whatever those different requirements are, but in that case, that's a really viable option. So I think
I just the absolutely right. There are two criteria that you need to solve for. One is a willing employer, and the second is that employer has a job that they're obviously training the apprentice for, but a job they can do also while they're training. And maybe it's the same job, maybe they're just less productive at that job, maybe it's a different job, but so I can absolutely imagine how that would fit with that company. Yeah.
I would call out, as conveners of employers, chambers are well positioned to be intermediaries in expanding opportunities to work-based learning. But I would think about that on a spectrum of work-based learning. So maybe not full-on apprenticeships, but starting with some challenges. And I would call out, there's some U.S. chamber folks in the back. And so if you want to talk to them about EPIC and some of the work that they're doing related to expanding work-based learning opportunities, they're sort of leading the way and thinking about the chamber as an intermediary in this space.
Sure.
Okay, well, I think we're at time here, so if you'll join me in giving a round of applause to our panelists.